Hey, everybody, welcome back to Wrongful Convictions and Cold Cases. I'm your host, Andy Hale, where I talk about various true crime cases with fascinating people in the true crime world. I've got with me today, I think, by far the hardest working investigative journalist out there in the true crime space, George Jared. This is a guy who wrote over 100 stories about the West Memphis Three. 100. Wrote a book about it. Been a featured speaker at CrimeCon in a couple years, has a podcast, Diamond State, Murder Board. He's always chasing down a ton of incredible stories. George, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Andy. It's nice to see you.
So today we're going to be talking about the Rebekah Gould case. And I'm kind of fascinated by parts of this. You told me about it. I know we've talked about it a few times. Tell me a little bit about who she was and, when she was killed and kind of the backstory.
Sure. So Rebekah Gould was a 22-year-old college student. She was living in the Fayetteville area in Arkansas, and she was actually from a little town called Mountain View, which is about 3 hours away. And so she was in college. On the weekend, she would come back to visit friends, and she had a sort of on again, off again boyfriend who lived in an even smaller town called Guyan, which is not far from Mountain View. And so it was a pretty typical weekend. Her and her sister Danielle decided to come back. It was around September 20th, 2004. They spent the weekend before. September 20th was Monday. And so she'd gone to stay with her boyfriend, sort of boyfriend, Casey, at his house. And it was a Monday morning. And so the story is that she decided to take him to work that morning, drop him off. His father had borrowed his truck, and so he didn't have a way to get to work. And she went back to his house. Now, he kind of lived out in the middle of nowhere. It was very rural, kind of up in the Ozark Hills. And she went back to his house to pick up her stuff, pick up her little Pomeranian dog, Lady, and head back to college, pick her sister up on the way. And she never arrived to pick her sister up. And how I got involved in the case was she didn't arrive to pick up the sister. And so the boyfriend never went back to his own house that night. He stayed at work all day. And then the story is that he went out with four friends to another town not far from there to watch a movie, Resident Evil 2. And then they went to the stores. They went back when the Hastings was the thing. They went to a Hastings and all this other stuff. And then he went actually stayed the night at another friend's house. Well, the next morning when the mom, obviously Rebekah's mother, started getting worried. And so she started calling around trying to find her. But she calls the sheriff's office and reports her missing that next morning. And so they do a welfare check at Casey's house because the story was is that he went from the friend's house straight to work, which we found out later that was a lie. He actually did go back to his own house and, to get clothes for work. And then he went back to work. But when the police go to Casey's house, they find his room destroyed, basically. The mattress had been flipped. There were bloody pillows in plain view. There was bloody sheets in the washing machine. Her car was there. Clothes were there. There was blood strewn throughout the house. There was a broken mirror, broken ashtray. I mean, the place was just destroyed. And she had two suitcases that she had brought that weekend. One of them was missing as well. Incidentally, her dog was there uninjured. So all of her stuff was there. The only three things that were missing were Rebekah, her suitcase, and a piano leg that would come loose from the piano in the front room of the house. And so,
Go ahead. Go ahead. I got some questions. Go ahead.
okay. So how I got involved was I was working as a journalist at a local newspaper, and I get a call. I'll never forget it. I was sitting at my desk, phone rings, pick it up. Lady's like, my niece is missing. And I said, really? And she said, yes. And of course, this is a small town newspaper. Things like this don't happen in small towns. So I go out there. I meet her father, Dr. Larry Gould. And then I meet her mother, Shirley, met some of her sisters, met some of her other relatives. And so for the next, week from the time she was missing, people were out looking for her in this very rural, mountainous area. And then finally on September 27th, 2004, which was again another Monday, a week later, I just had this feeling I needed to go to Melbourne. Melbourne's kind of like the county seat in the county where she went missing, and it's not real far from the little town she was in. And so I went to Melbourne. They have a typical southern town, got the courthouse, all the businesses all around it. And in the mornings, ladies would walk around the courthouse, and they would talk and whatnot. I pull up, get out of my truck. I see a group of ladies, walking. I'm actually was going to go in and talk to the Office of Emergency Management, the director, because I wanted to see how they were going to coordinate their searches for the week, so I would know kind of which search parties to go with and stuff like that. And as that's happening, I overhear one of the ladies say, "Yeah, they're out looking around my property or my house." I can't remember exactly what she said. And I asked her, I said, "Ma'am," I said, where's your property at?" And she told me it's down Highway 9, which is a very rural thoroughfare that connects Melbourne to Mountain View, which is the town that Rebekah was originally from. And it's a very treacherous road. If you've ever driven it, you would know what I'm talking about. Very windy, hilly, no shoulder, lots of wildlife, lots of it's just a dangerous road. So I go out there. I'll never forget there were like vultures up in the air. It was a
Mm,
beautiful sunny day,
mm.
probably mid 80s, one of those kind of, Indian summer type fall days. And I get out there and I see a row of cars on the side of the road next to this bend in the road. And so I thought, okay, these must be the searchers. So I get out, walk down the side of this embankment, and I saw a searcher. To this day, I don't know his name, but I recognized him from other searches that he had been out there. And I said, "Are you guys out here looking for Rebekah?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "She's right there." And he pointed, and I saw her.
Oh God.
Yeah, it was the first time. I mean, like anybody, I'd been to funerals for relatives and friends and things like that, or people that I
Oh,
knew. But it's the first time I'd ever seen a murder victim, and she was very, very badly decomposed. And Andy, what was astonishing was that was bad. But what I didn't realize is that something much worse was going to happen to me in a few minutes. So I kind of recoiled back to my truck, which was a mistake. I should have been taking note of the scene and taking mental notes at least if I wasn't writing them down. So I go back to the sheriff department, and her dad, who I had gotten to know over the last 5 6 days of this whole ordeal, he comes running up to my truck and he asked me. He says, "Did they find my daughter?" And
mm.
I told him, I said, "Andy, or not Andy, I'm sorry, his name is Larry." I said, "Larry, you need to go talk to the sheriff." And he grabbed me by my shoulders. And he was probably at this point 60 years old, but he was still a pretty good sized guy. And he said, "Did they find my daughter?" And I said, "Yes."
Mm.
And this guy started crying, fell to his knees, put his head in my stomach, and just started sobbing. I'd known him for 5 days. And so that's how my journey started down this case of Rebekah Gould.
Okay, question on what you said. When you said she had this on again, off again boyfriend, kind of boyfriend, and he lied and he actually went back to the house. Do you I mean the house where she was abducted from?
Yeah, his house. Yes.
And he would have gone back there at a time when like there was blood everywhere and everything?
Yes.
And he never reported that?
No, he did
Okay.
not.
Okay. So um I okay. I was doing a little bit of research when you told me this is a case you wanted to talk about, right? And I know a little bit of the backstory. I mean, now, so let's continue. But I got some more questions, so we'll play it out kind of like chronologically. But some things don't add up to me. So, all right, you get involved. Um, First, just tell me what year does the case get solved?
The case actually gets solved in 2020, so it was over
2020.
16 years.
Okay,
Yes.
16 years. The case is not closed. Okay. So you basically you're there when the body is found, and you're kind
Mhm.
of following the case the next 16 years to the extent there's anything to follow?
Yeah, so I wrote some stories about it initially, obviously, and then like a year later, there was an anniversary, and you write another story. The police had developed there was the interesting part about her case. There was two elements that were interesting. Number one was the piano leg, because to this day, Andy, I've never found a case where the murder weapon was a piano leg.
I collect these old like paperback crime novels from like the 50s, and they got these dramatic covers and these dramatic titles, and I really collect them for the artwork because I think the artwork's amazing. And it's just like the case of the missing piano leg, or I could see this dramatic cover with like a bloody piano leg, one of these Dell Mapback true, like crime books. So so tell me, like, when they find her body, it's 2004. I would think, just from what you told me, that the boyfriend, the quasi boyfriend, would be a prime suspect. Especially, what really has piqued my interest was when he has lied
Mhm.
about going back there. So to me, right now, he is already, to me, in the hot seat. Um, I take it he gets investigated in 2004.
Yes, he does. He was interviewed, I think maybe three times. The first time he was interviewed, he was asked to take a polygraph test, and he failed it. He said that she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen, but he didn't even go bother to go out and look for her when she was missing.
Let me pause a second. I'm sorry. I just this you're telling me that he lied about going back to the house, and when he went back to the house, it would have absolutely been at a time where it was the bloody crime scene,
Yes,
and he never reported it.
Andy, it's actually worse than that, because um, when the police initially arrived, when the responding officer arrived, he walked around the house and said at first nothing. He said it was messy, like there were clothes everywhere. It was just a messy house.
There's
But when
blood everywhere.
Right. But when he went into the bedroom, he noticed that the mattress had been flipped and that all the bedding was missing. So his immediate response was to go to the washing machine, open it up, and sure enough, there's blood. And anybody who wants to see any of this stuff, we've got the unsolved Rebekah Gould Facebook page. We have the entire case file uploaded to that Facebook. That's actually a group, and we have all the crime scene photos, except for pictures of her, obviously. Um, but he he opened like he the officer opened it up as soon as he saw the bedding. He immediately called the sheriff, his boss, and said, "Hey, we've got a crime scene here." Well, here's what's funny. So I interviewed Casey in June of 2005, and I asked him. I called him at work. And I said, "So," because he had been interviewed a few times, and then finally, basically, the police cleared him because they thought he was at work when she was murdered. And so I asked him, I said, "So that morning, you didn't go back to your own house. You went straight to work." And he said, "Yes." So he lied to me. Well, years later, when we got the case file, we found out that he did go back. And guess what, Andy? He opened the same washing machine. He admitted it in his first interview. He said, "I opened it up, saw the bedding in there, didn't know why it was in there, shut the lid, grabbed a shirt, and went back to work."
All right, let's pause. Let's just pause here. Okay. He first lied about going back to the house. How much time elapses until he admits he did go back? Like, is that within like days or weeks of of her body being found?
To the police, he admitted it within probably 12 hours. What's
Okay.
interesting is that he went to work first that morning. And what happened was is he didn't have the right work attire. So the manager told him, "You need to go home and get a shirt." So he didn't want to go home. He wasn't trying to go home,
All right. But
but he was told to, and then he did go home.
all right. And have you seen pictures of the inside of the house? Are,
Absolutely, I've got pictures.
are there is it obviously a crime scene?
Yeah, especially when you go in his room, there's no doubt. I mean,
There's
Andy,
blood
imagine
everywhere?
going. There's blood. Like there's a big bloody spot on the bed,
Okay.
like a round circle. There are
And
bloody pillows that are in plain view. There's stuff just destroyed in the room. Like there's a
how
mirror.
it's unfathomable. It's
Mhm.
unfathomable that he does not call the police. Like, I I'm blown away by the fact that he lied about that. He doesn't call the police, and this guy gets cleared. Um,
Mhm.
we're gonna come back to this. That to me, that's just that's insane. I mean, nobody. You come back to your apartment. It's a crime scene. There's blood. It's a huge mess. Your girlfriend's gone, and you don't call the police, and you don't go look for her, um, and you lie about it. Also, I mean, all right.
Yeah.
So I am so confused right now. All right, so he gets cleared for some reason, okay, which is unimaginable to me. I don't, I, you know, I don't see how in any world I can see how sometimes you can't charge somebody, right? I
Right.
get that distinction. Like we don't have enough evidence to prove somebody did it, but I don't get how somebody's necessarily cleared. But in any event, so is there because the case doesn't get solved for 15 more years? Um, is there a break in the investigation, and if so, when?
So, kind of going back to the chronology, just to kind of explain this out a little bit. So, I start working at a different newspaper, but it was actually kind of in the same coverage area. It was actually the local newspaper for where her dad lived, and so I kind of stayed connected that way. But then there was a lull of about probably till from 2004 to 2016 ish. I wrote about it again. I hadn't written about it in a long time, and there was literally nothing being done on this case. And Andy, I'll tell you what happened is they had a detective who worked it. He was actually there from day one. It wasn't his case, but he was helping with it. And then it quickly became his case. And he developed a false theory of the case. He thought that she was involved in some type of drug deal gone wrong. I mean, quite literally, somebody was saying it was she bought some marijuana for $40 and that this was some kind of crazy, deal, which she did smoke marijuana, but she had no drugs in her system when she was, when did her
What are these
autopsy.
guys doing? Like, I mean, I hear this all the time. It's so stupid, you know. I mean, go ahead. Like that's his
Yeah.
theory.
And what it is he was a former narcotics officer and then he became a homicide detective. And Andy, you know as well as I do, if you're born a hammer, every problem in the world has to be a nail. There's no other
Yeah,
option.
yeah,
And so he had
yeah,
this theory
sure.
that this
Yeah.
this druggy guy or a guy that was into drugs, I don't want to call him that, but that he loosely knew Rebecca and from high school. But he said he didn't even know where Casey lived. He'd never been there. He said, he had seen Rebecca around town some when she'd come into town. He'd say hi to her and all this other stuff. And so I knew, and it got to the point where this detective actually surreptitiously showed up at one of my book signings one time and came through the line. Of course, as soon as I see this guy, I'm like, because
What did he? What did he want to say to you?
well, he was wearing these ridiculous cut off jean shorts and like this cut off flannel thing. And I'm like, because, I mean, let's be honest, true crime, 99% of the people who consume it are female. And if a guy ever shows up at a book signing for me, it's because he's buying a book for his wife or his girlfriend. And so this guy comes through and I pitch in the book like I would anybody else. And people are standing in line behind him. And all of a sudden, he whips out his badge and goes, "Hi, I'm Special Agent Dennis Simons with the Arkansas State Police." And I'm like, "Oh, I hadn't seen him in like 10 years. I've actually seen him in court on other cases."
What did he want?
He told me he wanted to know what I knew, and I said, "Dennis, if you want to know what I know, call me on the phone and I will
Yeah,
tell you."
let me go to a public book signing and approach him there in a huge crowd and ask him about the case.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah. And so I guess I should back up on this. It was determined, Andy, that she died from a blunt force trauma to her head. She was too badly decomposed to tell if she'd been sexually assaulted. And there was another detail that we never revealed to the public, and actually the medical examiner didn't really catch it. Her hyoid bone had been broken, and
Her
so
what
we never
phone?
her hyoid in her neck.
Oh,
Yeah, it had been broken, which is usually an indication of like manual strangulation mostly, but it could just be, regular strangulation too. So in 2016, when I start writing about it again, I reconnect with her father. And him and I start down the path
Why do
again.
you why do you even start writing about it in 2016? Is there anything going on in 2016?
Yeah, what happened is I had written my book about West Memphis 3, and in the forward of the book, I mentioned her case, and I only mentioned it. I wanted to. It was. I thought, man, I'm only gonna write one book, probably my whole life. This was the first case I'd ever covered as a journalist. It was unsolved. Nobody was doing anything. There were no stories about it anymore.
This is
No
the
police.
first case you ever covered as a journalist?
Yes,
Rebekah
first
Gould
murder
case?
case.
Wow, okay, go ahead.
So I wrote about it in the forward of the book, but I didn't tell her dad. I hadn't been in contact with him in years. Didn't tell anybody in the family actually. And so I was doing a book signing one day at a library, and I'm sitting there. There's a photographer from a magazine taking pictures as people are coming in, and one of the first guys to come in, very handsomely dressed guy, looked like he was out riding his motorcycle with his group on the weekends. He comes in. I pitch him the book. And then at the very end, I said, "Hey, please read the first part of the book, the forward, because it's about an unsolved case it's near and dear to my heart, and I want it to get solved, and I need people to be paying attention." And so I pitched it, and I looked at him and I said, "So do you want to buy a book?" And he said, "No, I want to buy 10 of them."
Mm.
And I said, "Okay." Well, of course, I was joking with the photographer. I kind of whispered to her. I said, "Whatever I told this guy, I need to tell everybody today." you know, and so I go to fold over the first page of the first book, and I said, "Do I need to make this out to someone?" And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a little ribbon with Rebecca's face on it, and he sets it on the book.
Oh.
And as soon as he did it, I looked at him and immediately knew who he was. He was clean shaven this time. He was very disheveled when I saw him. It was her father, Dr. Larry
Oh
Gould.
gosh.
And so he pulls out this cross, this wooden cross, and he has her face on the cross. And he said, "This is what I keep on my desk." And of course, I get up, we start hugging, we both start crying. Photographer's sitting there taking all these pictures. So a couple days later, on the front page of the local newspaper, there's a picture of me and Dr. Gould hugging and crying. And how I found out about it was one of my friends texted me, and he's like, "Why are you crying like a little, well, you know what, on the
Yeah.
front page of our newspaper?" And I was like, "Oh," I said, I didn't
Oh.
know she would do that." But so we reconnected. So, and kind of my methodology at that time was, use the media,
Yeah,
newspapers,
yeah,
TV,
absolutely.
just smack them over the head. Well, we did that for a while, and it did generate a lot of interest. And the case started ramping up again. The police came under, some heat. Well, then it kind of died down. Well, then in 2018, Catherine Townsend, I didn't know Catherine at the time. She sent me an email, and she said, "Hey, I want to do a podcast called Hell and Gone, first season. I want to feature Rebecca's case. Would you be interested in being interviewed for that?" And I said, "Sure." And so I met with Catherine several times, and she recorded me, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. And that podcast came out in the fall of 2018, and it became like a hit. Like it was all over the place. Dr. Oz did like a hour-long show on it, um, and it just got popular. All these Facebook groups formed, and a lot of the family members from Casey's family were in these Facebook groups, and they would
Be
be
the quasi boyfriend guy.
right.
Yeah.
And so they would be talking about different elements and aspects of the case. And at the time, I had no, like, Andy, it was crazy. Like, and of course, this is 2018. This is, 6 years ago, or almost seven now. But there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments on, just like, somebody would just post one thing, and there would be hundreds of people chiming
Wow.
in. And it was crazy. And
Hmm.
unfortunately,
For a
a
case that
couple,
was that old too. I mean,
yeah,
it was, you
yeah,
know
no, Catherine did a really good job with her Helen Gone podcast. And so anyway, but again, like like in 2016, everything started going nuts, but then finally it started dying down again. And then I got a second email from Jennifer Buchholz. Um, she was a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army. She was or is a teacher at AMU University. She teaches forensics and criminology. She worked in the medical examiner's office in the city of New York for a couple of years. She actually, funny enough, not a lot of people know this. She worked as a correctional officer in Arizona for a year or
Hmm.
two in a prison.
Hmm.
She served in Iraq, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
She had worked for the State Department, training police officers in other countries. So she,
Impressive resume.
yeah, well, and she's actually a fantastic writer too. I told um, I was telling somebody when she sent me her first email, I was really mad because she sent her resume, which is good, which is impressive enough, but she was also a better writer than me, which I was like, who gets to have everything?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
She's awesome. Yeah.
yeah. So she emails me and she says, "Could I talk to you about this case? Because I think the police are missing some behavioral aspects." And as soon as she said that, it was music to my ears.
Mm.
Because the one thing that the police could never explain to me, especially the lead detective, I asked him before, I said, "Well, if this was just a druggie, why didn't he take a match and torch the house and walk away? Why is he doing laundry? Why did he put her body in his car and drive her 8 miles out to where she was dumped?" Because just to kind of give your audience a visual, so Guyan is here, Melbourne is here, Mountain View's here, and there's this old ancient gravel road a very treacherous gravel road that leads to the spot where she was dumped. So the only other route to get there, basically, you'd have to go through the town, which there's a one stop light, and it's one of those typical, again, southern towns where all the businesses are lined up on the main thoroughfare. So in broad daylight, you'd have to drive past every bit, excuse me, have to drive through every business with this, body in your vehicle. So the person took this ancient gravel road to dump her body. And so she said, "Can I talk to you for 15 minutes?" And I said, "Sure." I emailed her back immediately, said, "Yes." We spent 3 hours and 22 minutes on the phone the first time. Yeah. And so within a month, she comes to Arkansas um, to, to study this case, dragged her husband Jesse along with her for a whole week in February. Um, and so that's how it began. She'd never been to this part of the world ever. Um, and then she's probably made a dozen trips since. So she started writing about it for AMU University. So it started ratcheting up again. She started writing these articles. She would go on podcasts. It got to the point where she filed a report with the FBI because she thought that there was negligence going on, willful negligence going on in the Arkansas State Police. She arranged a meeting with the lieutenant governor of the state when she came to town.
Well, let me
Um,
pause you there. The thing is, I mean, I think a lot of times, like, you got a crime scene. There's so much forensic evidence in that house, and you have oftentimes um, police departments that have a very inexperienced forensic team, a very ill-equipped forensic team, and they don't really know how to process a crime scene. They don't really know what to look for, how to look for it, how to preserve it. They contaminate it. I mean, like, all your clues are in the house. There's 1,000 clues in that house. And it's just too bad that there's such a wide range of skill level between people who do that kind of work in different departments. But go ahead. So what happens next?
so she writes about it. We do some podcasting about it. Kind of ramp it up again. Well, then finally, again, it's like a roller coaster. We would ramp up, ramp up, ramp up, put pressure on the police to do something, put pressure on the killer, um, all this stuff. Well, then it started to ramp down. Well, when it started to ramp down, I told her, I said, "So remember, I talked about those Facebook pages with all those comments."
Yeah.
Looking back at that time, it was almost a year later. I was like, I made a huge mistake. I should have been screenshotting and saving every bit of that stuff because there was no telling what was being said that might be abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told Jennifer, I said, we need to start a Facebook page for for Rebecca's case. And Jennifer was like, no, because she actually got to see a few of the comments. What happened was is the people that were running those pages, they actually just took them down because it was getting so toxic, and they archived them, but they didn't save anything. So all that stuff was lost.
Oh
So,
gosh.
yeah, it was a mistake on my part, and I knew one of the ladies
So
that
so
ran
you
the page.
guys now, there's kind of like you're there's some interest in it now. Jennifer's looking into the case. You're taking a little deeper dive. Does something happen that kind of sparks things?
Yeah, we started getting a whole bunch of people join the page, and one of the first people that joined was a guy named William Miller.
William
And
Miller.
William Miller,
Okay.
and he was now we had a at this point we had a crowdsourcing team, and one of the members on our crowdsourcing team was a girl named Miranda who had actually dated Casey, and she was living in Lubbock, Texas at the time. And she was very good at genealogy. And so she had kind of mapped out his whole family, his cousins, his uncles, aunts, all these other people. And as soon as he joined our page, it was when he first joined our page, he was from the Philippines. He was living there. And so there was nothing at first. We're like, what's this guy doing here? Well, she almost immediately told us that he is Casey's first cousin. We're like, okay. So, and we figured some of his family members at some point would
Okay.
join under their
Okay.
name or under
So now
fake
you're
names.
piquing my interest. This guy's Casey's cousin. All right, go ahead.
And at first, we didn't think anything of him because, and he would comment. There would be a post. He commented all the time. He was a very pretty regular poster on there, and we didn't think anything of it at first because we did kind of trace his history, and we knew that he lived in a little town called Aransas Pass, Texas, at the time of the murder. Aransas Pass is like 11, 10 hours, something like that, away from where she was murdered. So again, no red flag there really, because I mean he's just a cousin who lived there. Coincidentally enough, while he was living there, my aunt and uncle lived in Aransas Pass, and I actually went down there and visited them once
What a
while he
small
was living
world.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a little town. It's not a huge
Yeah.
town. It's just a little beach town on the Texas coast. So he's commenting, doing this. Nothing. He was kind of he wasn't necessarily steering us away from Casey, but he was like going to all these weird theories and so whatever. Well, then on Casey's birthday in 2020, January 16th, he starts direct messaging Jennifer. Now he had sent me
Hmm.
some DMs. I think he sent me two, but I don't even know that I responded because I thought he was just some another family member on this Facebook page. Well, he started talking to her, and he was still commenting, and he just kept going on and on. And she asked him, she said, "Well, how did you find out about this case? You live in the Philippines." And what it was is he worked on oil rigs around the world. That was his job, his vocation. And so he had married a girl from the Philippines. And so he had moved there. He had a plantation there. And so he's continuing to comment, well, COVID hits. And around that time, the state police finally assigned a new detective to the case, Mike McNeil. And they'll never admit this publicly, but I've been told, by multiple sources that mine and Jennifer's antics were some of the reasons why they had decided to assign a new detective because they were getting sick and tired of all the bad publicity. Um, I mean, it got so bad at one point, Andy, that they said, well, a lady who works for the state police told a relative of the family that they would never be able to solve the case because I had revealed too much of their case file because so much of it had gotten leaked to me, which was absurd. I mean, I was like, when I was told this, it was like 14 years in. I'm sitting there going, "You haven't solved it in 14 years." I mean, I'm not hurting the case. I said, if anything, I'm helping. So they assign a new detective, and so he goes back to ground zero. He's like, "Okay, we're going to start completely over." And I've talked to him a lot about this. He's a great guy. He decided he was going to go back to the family and start working his way out again. He's going to start brand new, you know. And so, spring turns to summer. We're still all living in COVID lockdown, blah, blah, blah. Well, then in September, something interesting happens. Jennifer and I get tipped off that cousin, William Miller, was in town that weekend. And this is a revelation
Wow.
because, yes, and Andy, the reason is because our analysis of this case was that it was a male member of this family who killed her. Someone had to have a connection to that house. And so we looked at Casey. We looked at he had two brothers that lived there. Actually has three, but he had two brothers that lived in the vicinity at the time. His dad lived with him, but his dad was a truck driver, so he was gone a lot. So we were looking at people in their family, but guess what? A first cousin would be a very close relative. And so we found this out. And how crazy this is how we found this out. So William Miller's brother Jeremy and his mother Linda were living not far from Casey's house at the time of the murder. They had only been in Arkansas for a few months, but they were living close. The story is that William came up that weekend to help them move. And how we got the tip was that there were a couple of people at the local school district where Jeremy, he was in school, he was like a freshman in high school. They said it was very odd. There were two people there specifically who said that Linda and William showed up like the day after Rebecca was reported missing to take Jeremy out of school, and they said he was acting really weird.
Who is
And so
Jeremy?
he is William's younger brother.
Okay.
And yeah, so the mom and William, him and his mother go to get Jeremy out of school, take him out of school because they're going to move back to Texas. And so they reported to police. So police had this in the case file from almost the jump. And they move. They leave within 36 hours of Rebecca being reported missing. They're gone. They're back in Aransas Pass. Well, the police interviewed Jeremy, William, and Linda in Texas before they ever even found Rebecca's body. So they did do some due diligence. The police in Arkansas.
All right, so now this guy is back. This William Miller's on the radar screen. So what happens next?
So he stopped after we get the tip. He stops messaging on our page. Like he just kind of vanishes. And so, funny enough, the detective in the case, he was on our page too, watching his every move. Under he had a fake name. He was under a fake profile, and so he'd been watching him. Well, what we later found out is that the detective went to Casey, went to his brothers, went to the dad, went through all the relatives, and fifth or sixth on his list was William. Now, interestingly enough, William could not go back to the Philippines at this time because of the COVID lockdown. He wasn't a national, so they weren't letting anybody who wasn't a national back in the country. So he would have to come back to when he got off the rig out on the ocean, he would have to come to the United States and stay with his mom and brother. And at this point, they're living in a little town called Cottage Grove in Oregon. And so on
In the state of Oregon?
yes,
Okay.
which is where I grew up. And in fact, that's not that far from where I grew up. It's not that far.
That's so weird.
It
So,
gets weird. It gets
okay,
weirder for trust me.
go ahead.
So on November 7th, 2020, Mike McNeil flies out to Oregon to interview Jeremy, William, and Linda. It's a Saturday. Okay. And so he flies out there, and pretty quickly he's in the room with William, and he's very suspicious of William. Just I don't know if it was just a hunch, but he was very suspicious of him. And so he asked William, and you can watch this video. It's pretty fascinating on our page. We've got the whole
This is on the
confession.
Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me the name of it again, because I will check it out.
The Unsolved Murder of Rebekah Gould.
Okay, I'll check it out. Go ahead.
Yeah. And everything's on there. We have the whole case file. Everything.
Yeah, I'd like to check out that video. I love stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. So he says, if you're ever in Arkansas, would you agree to do a polygraph test? Because, we've done it, all your other male relatives have done it. And he goes, oh, yeah, if I was in Arkansas, I'd do it. Well, what William didn't know is that the detective had already had a polygraph examiner was in the next room. And so he just gets on his phone and is like, hey, I know it's a Saturday, but is it possible to get a polygraph examiner over here? And so Williams already said that he would do it. So he's caught kind of in a trap. And so he doesn't really have a choice. And so polygraph examiner comes in. They do the polygraph. He fails. And so then the detective does something that is, I don't know if I should say it like this, but it's one of the ballsiest moves I've ever seen. He comes in and says, you failed the polygraph. I know you're lying. Now I want you to explain two things to me. First, he reaches into like this folder and he pulls out a picture of the inside of the actual truck that William Miller owned in 2004. He tracked it down in South Texas. He had the Texas Rangers go and take pictures inside this truck. He said, I want you to explain to me why Rebekah Gould's DNA was found next to this pedal in your truck. And then the second thing he shows him is a rag that was used to clean up the scene. He goes, guess what? We have extracted a DNA profile from this rag. We have the killer's DNA.
And were both of those lies?
They were both lies.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so he breaks down and he starts telling this cockamamie story about how he, showed up and these two guys were doing something in his cousin's house and blah, blah, blah. Well, and finally he just breaks down. Mike McNeil, the detective's like, dude, you're lying. Just tell the truth. So finally he says he showed up at Casey's house the night before because he had just gotten into town and he needed help moving his mom's stuff. So he went to Casey, said, "Hey, can you help me?" He claims he never got out of his truck and went into the house, which again is another lie because guess what? There's Casey was asked if there was anybody in his house, like give a list of people that if we find DNA, who would be in your house. And literally on the list, and there's a list of 8 to 10 people. Jeremy, William's brother, and William are both listed, and out beside their names it says Sunday, which is like there's not even a
Did
date for
nobody ever
anybody else.
followed up on this?
No, no. And so anyway, the story is that he was talking to Casey. Casey said, "No, I got to work tomorrow morning. I can't help you." And then he sees Rebekah on the porch. She's just standing out there. So he knows that Rebekah will be home alone the next morning. So he goes and takes his truck and hides it in the field behind Casey's house, comes and knocks on the door. She answers. He says he's having truck problems. He needs to use the phone. He's Casey's cousin. He says, I was faking like I was on the phone, and this murderous rage just came over him, and he decided to murder her. And while he's pacing back and forth, the piano leg, which would come loose, just falls onto the ground. So then he takes the piano leg, goes into the bedroom where she kind of had retreated to, where she was like collecting up her clothes and putting them in suitcases. He hits her in the face twice with the piano leg, and then he throw it. What's interesting, not interesting, it's just horrible, Andy, but there was a large pool of blood on the floor. So she was laying on the floor with her heart beating for a while. But then she's placed on the bed for some reason, and we probably all know why. Then he goes to the closet, grabs a necktie, wraps it around her neck, and strangles her to death. He said
So
he didn't sex.
he confesses to the whole thing.
Yes.
William Miller confesses to the whole thing.
Yes.
And he's arrested and he goes to prison.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that he didn't just confess to killing her. He confessed to killing 5 other women right out. Like he confesses to her murder, and then the polygraph examiner comes back into the room, and he starts talking to him, and then they just start going down this path, where he gives specific details. Like he said, he kidnapped a girl from a convenience store. She was at a payphone. He kidnaps her, takes her out into the middle of nowhere, tells her that they're going to have sex, and then he says that.
All right, hold on. I want to get into that. 1 second. William Miller gets charged with the murder of Rebekah Gould based on his confession, right?
Yes.
And I looked it up. It looked like he got sentenced to, did he plead guilty? He got sentenced to 40 years?
Yes.
Okay. My opinion, my humble opinion, just based on what I heard, I still don't think it makes any sense whatsoever that Casey comes back and finds a bloody crime scene and doesn't report it. So why it just, there's nothing anybody can say to me that can explain that. So just little old Andy Hale, I would think maybe these guys were involved in this together. Did that get investigated?
I don't think that it got thoroughly investigated. I think that they thought it was a possibility because even at the moment when Mike is going after William, he says, "Did did did you do this, or did Casey do this and you helped him cover it up?" And here's a little tidbit for you, Andy. Casey has confessed to a friend that he was involved, and yeah, and not not just one time did he confess. He confessed to this friend 4 times. There's a sworn, yeah. So, there's a theory, there's a prosecutorial theory out there, and I've actually talked about this before, that if 2 weapons were used in the commission of crime, that could be indicative of 2 people being involved. Because it's really weird. The piano leg thing was so weird to me. I mean, for forever.
That's in my Starved Rock murder case. I mean, there's
Yeah.
multiple murder weapons. I hired a forensic pathologist to say these women had injuries caused by blunt force trauma with something with a pointy edge. He said maybe like a tire iron. And there's also one caused with a round edge, like a baseball bat. So Chester Weger or anybody else is not out there whacking with the baseball bat and said, you know what, let me put that down. Let me get my toolbox out. Let me get my tire iron now, get a few whacks with that. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm just saying, as a layperson hearing the story, um, I'm just giving you my personal opinion. I'm not saying anybody's guilty. I'm just saying, if I was investigating the case, even with William Miller confessing, uh, I just don't think there's a logical explanation for Casey coming home, seeing the bloody crime scene and not reporting it and lying about it. That would really be a massive nuclear red flag to me, um, to this day. I mean, I just still can't even.
You
I'm
want
going,
to you? I can give you a second nuclear red flag if you
okay,
want one.
yeah, okay.
So before the case ever got solved, I actually had he went out with those four friends that Monday night before she's ever reported missing. Two of their police statements were leaked to me. And in those statements, they say they were surprised that Casey wanted to go out with him because he's a recluse. He doesn't like to go out with his friends. They said that at one point he got on, not on his phone, but he got on somebody else's phone and used it. And I always suspected that he was checking his own voicemail. Remember when you used to be able to do that? You could check
Yeah,
your cell phone voicemail from some other phone. When he gets done checking his voicemail phone, and both of these statements line up directly. Both of those friends said he got off the phone and said, Rebekah's missing and they can't find her. So he knows Monday night that she's missing. And both friends said they couldn't believe he wasn't running out the door to find her because he was so obsessed with her. Now, so we've got those two statements. Now, here's the other. Once the case was solved, we had the other two friends who said exactly the same thing. So we have four witnesses who said he
unbelievable.
got on the phone and he knew she was missing, and all four said that he was obsessed and in love with her, and he couldn't believe that she was missing. Now, let me give you a note. Yeah, so he knows. So when he goes back to this house, opens that lid of that washing machine,
I
sees
mean, no
his
way.
brother's
I mean, I'm
clothes.
sorry. I'm just sorry. Nobody acts that way. There's not a person in the world that acts that way. And here's the thing. What caught my eye, uh, I don't necessarily buy that, like, oh, the piano leg fell off and now I can use it as a weapon. That, when I first heard that, who knows that the piano leg is loose? The
Right,
guy who lives in the house, who knows that that is loose and can be pulled out easily and used as a weapon? It didn't just fall off. And then
right,
William thinks, oh, I got a piano leg here that I can use. That makes no
right.
sense. Um, I don't know.
I'll,
I'm just stunned that, it turned out the way it turned out. You
yeah.
know,
Well, I can explain a little bit of it, Andy. So the police have this theory that she was killed Monday morning. And so forevermore, this was the chain of events. She takes Casey to work, drops him off at 8:08 in the morning, and it's a local Sonic restaurant. Okay. Then she drives back towards his house. A couple of miles down the road, there's a gas station called the Possum Trot. She stops off there. Yeah.
go ahead. All
Yeah.
right, go ahead.
Can't make it up.
Yeah, yeah.
So she stops off at the Possum Trot. She gets a cappuccino, talks to the clerk. There's a video camera there. It sees everything, captures everything. She gets back in her car and then she drives south back towards Casey's house. Okay, they see all this. Clerk says nobody was in the car with her. I actually walked outside when she was walking out. All this other stuff. So when we get the case file, we're like, okay, well, we're going to start. Let's see where this video's at. Well, first thing is there's no video of her at the Possum Trot. Um, we were told that the manager at the Sonic and one of the car hops at the Sonic saw Rebekah, waved at her, talked to her, did all this other stuff. Well, we get their statements, and guess what? The manager never saw her. The car hop never saw her. So now you're down to just the clerk, who is now a witness. And the clerk said that she was wearing a different outfit than what Casey said she was wearing that morning. So they have contradictory, statements as far as what she was wearing. And also, so when the police swept the house, they gave it back a few days. They gave the house back before they ever found her body. Well, the dad had come home, obviously, with all the stuff going on. He opens the microwave up, and inside the microwave was a breakfast sandwich and a cappuccino. And so what the police did is they got the register tape from the register, and they found at 8:03, I think, someone had bought a sandwich and a cappuccino.
Mm.
Here's the problem. The register tape, it's at 8:03. Casey's dropped off at work at 8:08. She has to drive back to the convenience store. It's a couple of miles. It's rush hour in the morning to go to school. This is a one road town basically, so everybody's on that road. She has to go into the convenience store, and she had to get a cappuccino out of one of those old cappuccino. You remember those old machines that would generate forever, and you'd have
Yeah.
to sit there, beep, 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 beep. Okay, and so, and the clerk said that she didn't buy a sandwich. She said all she got was a cappuccino. Well, we estimated that she would have been back in that convenience store around 8:22, 8:23. And I even told the lead detective, I said, so what did she do? Did she teleport back in time? I mean, how did this happen? And he goes, well, I'm not trusting the register tape from a cash register back then. And I said, yeah, but you are, because you're trusting that same sandwich and cappuccino that were found by the family in the microwave. You're trusting that register tape is recording that transaction. So you're trusting it when you want to, but you're not trusting it when it comes to the timestamp, because the timestamps don't match. And here's another interesting thing. And again,
So what do you think happened there?
well, let's see. The police didn't find it. The family found it.
Hmm.
And then I got a call from the clerk, and she's like, I don't know. She goes, I never worked on Mondays. I worked on Sundays. And I went, huh. And she actually, when she's telling the story, of course, and again, Andy, this is how deep in the weeds we go. So I get the register tape, right? And I'm looking at it, and the transaction happens at 8:03. There's another transaction at 8:05, 2 minutes later. The clerk said that Rebekah came in, got the cappuccino, went to the front desk or checked out. Then the two of them walk outside because the clerk said she was going to get a newspaper because she was looking for a new car. And she said, I want to look in the car section. Okay, well, the local newspaper, the Melbourne Times, they're a weekly paper and they come out on Wednesdays. So she wasn't looking at that. Now there is a newspaper in Arkansas that has a car section. It comes out on Sundays. And she said she went out to Rebekah's car. She looked in there because she noticed it was a manual shift car, because she was talking about cars with Rebekah. She goes to the paper rack to see if there's a paper in there and then goes back in. Well, if that's all true, how was she at the register less than 2 minutes later checking someone else out if she did?
That's an awful lot of detail. That's an awful lot of
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. And so, and she said she never worked on Mondays. And she told me, she said, she goes, I can't, she goes, I hope that my statement was the only thing that proved that she was alive. And I said, your statement is the only thing. And Andy, I'll give you one more detail that Jennifer and I mined out. So there's pictures of the inside of Rebekah's car. And one thing that always struck me about this breakfast sandwich and this cappuccino, the cappuccino is filled to the brim, hadn't been drank, sipped, nothing. Okay. Okay. Maybe she didn't drink any of it. What's weird is that when you looked at her cup holders in her car, they were filled with old cans, like used can. It's clearly obvious.
She didn't even have it in the cup holder.
Right. So I'm sitting there going, why didn't she throw away the empties and put you're gonna, I mean,
Yeah. So a couple things that I want to ask about. So before we get to the 5 bodies, because I want to end with the 5 other cases.
sure.
William Miller never implicates Casey, correct?
He never did before he was convicted. He has since then.
Oh, he has? What has he had since then?
So I interviewed him. Jennifer's gone to the prison and talked to him a couple of times. She's on his friends list. I actually went and interviewed him as a journalist so I could record it. And so I interviewed him in the warden's office probably a year and a half. Oh, fun. Oh, I forgot to tell you the other fun fact about the day he got arrested. That, Andy, is my birthday, November 7th.
You always have crazy weird things happening to you. So when you interviewed him, did he implicate Casey to you?
Absolutely. He
Really?
said that he said he showed up. See, and the reason I set up that timeline with the clerk and the drop off is because there is no proof of life Monday morning. There's none.
So what does he tell you?
He says that he showed up at Casey's house um, that Sunday night, and Casey had done it. Like he had he didn't say that he murdered her, but he knew something had happened to her in the house. He didn't say Casey did it, but he said Casey was there. He was using bleach to clean up. Now the story's probably implausible, the way he tells it. And people ask me all the time, they're like, "Well, if William Miller, if other people are involved, why doesn't he just rat them out?" And I'm like, because there's a possibility that his brother could be implicated, and he's very close to his brother, and so he's not trying to protect Casey if Casey had any involvement. He's trying to protect his brother, and so that's
Protect whose brother?
his brother
Oh,
Jeremy.
his, his brother. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. Did he tell Jennifer that Casey was involved?
yes.
Wow. And so are the police still investigating this, or like is this still like, I mean, is Casey still potentially going to get charged with anything?
At this point, probably not.
Wow.
I mean, oh, I'll tell you another fun fact if you want
Wow.
one.
That's crazy.
This trailer house where this whole thing happened, Casey lived there with his wife and two kids for 15 years after the murder.
In the place where it happened, in the same.
Same
Oh,
room, had the
oh.
same room.
Wow. I got, I mean, I got so many things that are weird about that whole scenario. I can't believe that in light of all the things you told me, that William is the only person that got charged in this. But let's skip to.
Oh, I could tell you one other thing that you would find interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was a cleanup at the scene, right? Coincidentally, William Miller's mother, Linda, dropped off all the cleaning supplies that were used to clean up this murder scene on the porch. She said that her brother, who is Casey's father, called her and said, "Hey, could you buy some, detergent and bleach and all this other stuff, and could you just leave it on the porch?" So the mom actually showed up, and she admits to it, and left all the cleaning supplies that were used to clean up the scene. I guess it was just a coincidence.
I just think, again, this is just my opinion, and just talking here on this podcast. It sure seems like there was more than one person involved in that crime, for sure. It sounds like there's more than one person involved in that crime. But I want to go to this part about, we'll end with this. He admitted that he killed 5 other people.
Yes.
Have you figured out who any of those 5 are?
Not yet, but we have some strong suspicions about at least one of them. Like we
He so
remember
he
earlier I was telling you that story about
This guy's
how
some
he
kind of
said,
serial killer?
yeah, he's a confessed serial killer. Yes.
Wow.
And Andy, here's the thing: is
What's he like when you talk to him?
he's very maniacal. He's a pathological liar. He's lost some weight now, but he's like 5'5" and probably weighed 300 pounds at the time of all this happening. Um, he said in his confession, he says, "I'm a monster. I'm a liar." He says, "I trick everybody." He called me a scumbag and said that he hated my guts and all this other nice stuff whenever he was confessing. So, of course, I go in the warden's office. First thing he does, he goes, "Well, I guess I owe you an apology." And I said, "You don't owe me anything."
Wow.
Yeah.
You sat across from like a real live serial killer. That's got to be so, I don't know, what's the word? Like creepy, scary, um,
He,
eerily fascinating, but scary.
yeah, I mean, people ask me all the time, like, "Do you get scared around these guys?" I'm like, "No." I said, "Most of the people they kill are like women and children, and they just overwhelm them." I'm just not, I mean, I'm not saying that he couldn't or some guy couldn't overwhelm me, but um, I'm not the target. I'm not the kind of person.
So he in conversation just brought up like 5 other people.
He said a couple of them were sex workers, which we found out later. He was very prolific when it came to, and he said he never killed anybody overseas, which was ludicrous because if you're going to kill people, I mean, the Philippines, I mean, you can get away with anything over there. So he said he killed, let's see, one in Texas, one in either Mississippi or Alabama. He couldn't remember. He was on the state line somewhere. He couldn't remember if he actually killed her, which state. Oklahoma, um, Louisiana. I mean, literally, Andy, this is no joke. We talked to one of his male relative of his. He said they were out driving around one night near New Orleans, and the male relative said, "Hey," that William told him. He said, "Hey, let's go find a prostitute. We'll tag team her, and then when we're done with her, we'll just kill her and throw her in Lake Pontchartrain, and nobody will miss her. They'll never find her. No one will care."
My God.
Yeah, and so the
Are you
case that
are you actively trying to find these 5 people?
yes. And in fact, the FBI was supposed to send out a VICAP alert. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's an alert where they let other agencies know, hey, we're looking for, specifically looking for,
Do you
this
have
type.
any information out there if like is there any public information out there in terms of what some of the details are? So somebody, if they have a loved one missing, they could try to just match it up and see like where can somebody look to see what he told you?
Join our Facebook page, and on our Facebook page, we've launched an initiative called Project Rebekah, and what
Wow.
we're doing is we're trying to get a group of crowdsourcing people on our crowdsourcing team who are looking into local cases because we have people on that Facebook page from all over the country. We're specifically looking at a case in Georgia because one of the most detailed of his confessions, he confessed to killing this girl. He saw her at a payphone. She was on a payphone talking. He said that he kidnapped her, took her out in the middle of nowhere, did what he did to her and killed her. Um, we have a case in Georgia that matches up very, very well to what
Wow.
he said. And we also have, I'll just say this, Andy, I don't think we're talking about this publicly yet. We have very good evidence that he was studying that case very intently.
Really?
And we also know for a fact that he would intently study Rebekah's case. Like when the Helen Gone podcast came out, he was
Mhm.
intently studying it. We have information. I can't say how we got it yet, but we will eventually.
Wow.
And we
When's
also,
the last time you talked to him?
December of 2023.
Do you think he would talk to you again?
Jennifer's going to try to talk to him in March of this year. She's coming down. We're doing an event. We're speaking at an event that's about 3.5 hours from where he's at.
Wow, what an amazing, crazy story. Serial killer charged with Rebekah Gould. I think it sounds like it's more than one person involved in that case, for sure. He admits to 5 other murders. Who knows what else is out there? He's admitted he's a monster. He's admitted he's this kind of person. Holy schmoly.
Yeah,
Man, it's crazy.
yeah. And this other case we're looking at in Georgia, it's the murder of Elaine Nix. She was murdered on the same day as Rebekah, just years earlier. And here's the thing, Andy. I will I do presentations on Rebekah's case, and I'll have pictures. I will mix in a picture of Elaine Nix with Rebekah's pictures. Nobody in the crowd ever picks up. They not one time has
They
they
look
ever
that similar.
they're the same build, the same height, they had the same hair, looks
So,
exactly the same. And here's the thing: I will go back to the picture. I'll say, "Okay, guys, did you miss this picture?" And I'll go, "Is this Rebekah Gould?" And literally everybody in the crowd will be like, "Yeah, that's Rebekah." And I'm like, "No, it's not." They
wow.
could literally be sisters. Yes.
So William Miller, he got sentenced um just recently, right? Like a few years ago or
October of 2022.
okay. And so now is he in prison in the state of Arkansas?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. You gonna write a book about this one?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, the story is so sad. This poor girl wrapped up in this situation. But then to think that William Miller's got this whole backstory to him and this whole history to him that who knows what else he's done. Um, Man, oh man. Well, I think what's fascinating, what I want to maybe have you back on here later in the year is um, I would love to try to help you spread the word about these other cases and what you know to try to reach somebody who might be related to one of those victims who might say,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, this sounds like so-and-so's case. Like, just to try to spread the word about that. Um, Project Rebekah is on that same Facebook page.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me the name of the Facebook page again.
The Unsolved Murder of Rebekah Gould.
Okay, I got to go check that out. Everybody listening, go check that out. Wow. When you hear these stories too, you sometimes feel like, you're telling me about a fictional detective novel that you read and it was a book you read. And hearing you describe it, it's real people, real lives that have been upended, real tragedy, real heartbreak, real violence. There's people out there who do these evil things for God knows why. And to think that they're out there right now. There's how many out there just roaming the streets right now? You could be buying gas and the guy next to you is William Miller. You could be in the convenience store and the guy behind you with the six-pack is William Miller. You don't know. I mean, holy shit, it scares the shit out of me sometimes.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I got a lot more I got to digest in this. We're going to probably have a part two. Um, I think for now, we'll leave it right here where we're at. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I told people forever that, and I hated to use the term. I've covered some really heinous crimes, but the original story with Rebekah Gould is she was bonked on the head with a piano leg and her body was tossed. There was no sign of sexual assault, but as we know, and Jennifer and I talked about this, she was out there long enough that there would be no semen left. She was very badly decomposed at this point. I used to use the term, Andy, and I hated that I did it. I said it was kind of a ho hum murder. They just killed her for whatever
Yeah.
reason and tossed her body, and literally it has turned into one of the most insane. You could write a TV series about this, it and not even use any fictional element to it. It's
Yeah.
insane. There's so many family elements to this that we didn't
Mm.
even dive into. The
Well, even when
Vidoc
you talk
Society.
about like the relationship with her father and you had to tell him the news,
Mm-hmm.
it's a parent's ultimate nightmare that you never get over it. It's incredibly sad and tragic and
Oh,
um
and Andy, the sister that she was supposed to pick up, Danielle, she died from brain cancer at the age of 38 last year.
I mean, so that just why, like why? Well, you're doing amazing work. You are a pit bull when it comes to tracking down information. There's nobody more persistent, thorough. I'm so impressed when I talk to you because if I told you right now there's a great witness 10 hours away, you'd get in your car right now and hit the road, man. Like you'd walk 10 miles in the snow to find that piece of evidence. I'm so impressed with your tenacity, how much you care about the victims and their families. I mean, there's a real passion there in the work you do, and I want to commend you. I'm really proud of you, brother.
Thank you.
You are the real deal, my friend. Well, thanks for coming on. To be continued. We'll check back in maybe in the summer and we'll see where you're at. I got a feeling, knowing you'll have a bunch of updates for sure.
I hope so.
To be continued. All right. Talk soon.